So we're really delighted to welcome you here today for this PayPal Melbourne Fashion Week event. And we're going to hear shortly from Tarryn Handcock, who's a senior lecturer and program manager in RMIT School of Fashion, and also a member of the RMIT Design Archives Advisory Panel. It's 30 years since the establishment of the Fashion and Textiles collection at RMIT. And across the table, you've got some examples of the things that were acquired in its earliest days. The RMIT Design Archives has been managing this collection since 2007. However, it was originally based in the School of Fashion and Textiles as a resource for students. And we had a significance assessment a couple of years ago, and the collection was recognised as being nationally significant, both for its aesthetic qualities, historic qualities. And so, you know, it's a pleasure for us to be able to manage such a diverse and interesting collection here. We've been really delighted to work with Tarryn Handcock and her colleagues over the last 2 years. We've had some wonderful classes with fashion and textile students who come in and look at the original materials. It's just great to see that it's still being used. So for today, Tarryn and Archives Officer Simone Rule have selected highlights from the Fashion and Textiles collection just to give you a bit of a glimpse of the depth and range of the collections we hold. So over to you, Tarryn.
Thank you, I've got my little headset. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have been invited to speak and to be here with Simone and Anne to share some of these with you. And the collection is a really remarkable one. It has been around for 30 years. I just learnt that Karen Webster over here was part of the original acquisition team, so we're very lucky to have Karen here, who might have some excellent facts to add for us at the end as well. But I'm really excited to be here for a number of reasons. One being what Anne has alluded to, that this collection is a remarkable one for this week. It's really exciting to be able to have Simone pull a number of the pieces out of the archive that rarely see the light of day. So it's a real treasure that we have before us to be able to look at these things. And while we can't do much touching of the very enticing looking textiles, at the end you will be able to do some flicking through of the folios, which is definitely worth it. And I do have a couple of printed out images that we can do a little pass around, get the educator out, so we can have a look at some of those during the talk as well. I think it's really important, just as an extension of the acknowledgement of country that Anne has given, to talk about the fact that the archive that we have here is really largely across a 20-year period. It's really from the 30s through to the 50s that we have most of these pieces. There are some more contemporary pieces down the end, but when we're talking about a legacy of fashion and textiles, innovation, education, passing along of knowledge and technological change, it's really just a blip in the technology and the innovation of this country and design that's happened in this place. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, particularly because we do see with some of these pieces and some of the designers here, influences that come from across the South Pacific and really drawing inspiration from Indigenous First Nations cultures in Australia as well. So we see the legacy of First Nations people coming through in this design work, as well as some of the ideas that are carried on. Now, I do have notes. I need paper with me at all times because I get too excited and I'll get really, really off topic, and I've already warned Simone, like, this could be a deeply chaotic ride where we don't get to the end of it. So we're going to roll with whatever happens here and just enjoy what we have before us from the archive. I am going to read you out some of the dates because I don't want to ruin any of the narrative that is important with timestamps and looking at the interconnection between some of these. But I suppose the angle that I want to take today and that I really wanted to share with everyone as part of Melbourne Fashion Festival is how archives have this incredible legacy that they bring with them. And I think importantly, again going back to that acknowledgement, this is not the past that we see before us, it's a past. We're working with multiplicities here, and what we're seeing is a very, very small window with a very, very small lens through that window, refracted with lots of different light. We're going to stretch the metaphor, but this really represents a range of different textile techniques, technologies, innovation, creativity, that's from a very small section of history, as I've noted. And when we talk through it, I just want you to keep that in mind. We're not talking about, solid things that are. We're talking about things that have occurred, but alongside many other things that we can't cover today. So my kind of lens that I'm applying through that refracted light of window is how we use this today with value for emerging designers. So I'm primarily an educator. That means I get to bring in lots of very enthusiastic people, many of them very young in their first year of university, who are really excited to understand more about histories, plural, of fashion and textiles, and to really get a sense of where they fit into that bigger picture. And I think archives give us a real sense of one of those possibilities that we might have as part of a bigger trajectory or a part of a bigger picture. So we have one of those pictures here today. And I guess when I'm taking students through and we're looking at how can archives offer us insights into pasts and how can it have a value for us as an emerging designer, as someone early in our career, it really helps us to form a sense of the innovation for materials, what's happened over time, what's been occurring concurrently, as well as the kind of evolution that's occurring and where we sit amongst that. So what we have for the selection here today, and I'm going to get back on track now, going back to the notes, it is a breadth of textile technologies and it is a breadth of creative design approaches that we have here, which I think is the most exciting when we see it in its material form rather than we have it as an image. It's also those shifts in textile technologies, and one of the things I'm most excited to hopefully get around to is really talking about how the marketing and the sharing and the promoting of fashion and textiles has shifted over time. So we have some really interesting examples of how textiles are often forgotten. The designers are not always acknowledged, but there have been some really exciting ways that has happened in the past. So in Glowleaf, there are some really good examples. But also how this collection and the pieces that are pulled out from the different designers' archives gives us a real sense of expressions of Australian identities and the kinds of cultural influences that come into that. So I'm hopeful that we might get through these things in a glancing way, but I think it's really good to start at the outset with that's the kind of value that we get out of it as educators and that we get to share with people, which is really quite exciting. So this is largely a collection from the 20th century, so mid-century, largely the 30s to the 50s, as I've said, all based in Melbourne, although the designers do have lots of international movement that they have. So what I'm going to start with is talking a little bit about the textile techniques and technologies that we have across the table, sort of starting from down this end and moving on up this way where it's a little bit more contemporary. But we're going to start down over here, and this is a range of pieces that are from the Michael O'Connell collection. So Michael O'Connell, from about 1929, started to work with lino cut printing, and we are very lucky to have a couple of the lino blocks for printing here. What's quite exciting about them when we look at these is it's pretty rare to have a block print preserved. They do get a bit crumbly over time, so it's remarkable for them to be in this state. And you might see that there's almost a South Pacific influence with the kind of motif here. We are going to come back to that at some point. I have my fingers crossed. But O'Connell was working with a whole range of really quite beautiful dyes, and he was transferring them to Irish linen. Really beautiful, high-quality material that he could get his hands on. And we can see with some of the works in here, and someone might have to hold it up again, but he was using some techniques that we still see quite a lot today, so the pin and ponce method. So we've got these kinds of motifs that he would draw out. These ones are by pencil, and then he'd go in and he'd poke them with a pin and put a little bit of dust and pigment over the top so it would transfer onto linen underneath to experiment with placement of motifs, which is, it's still used quite commonly today, but I don't see many young people using it. So we might get a revival with using some of these techniques across newer collections and designs. So down here at the front, we've got this really remarkable, a block print, not a screen print, we're going to move up to that, but a really remarkable block print from lino that he's done here. And you can really see with the composition of this that there's an influence that's coming through from different artists that are contemporary at the time. So we can kind of see Matisse as part of this, the influence of the school of Paris as part of this design. Maybe not with the use of colour, because Matisse was very known for the colour, but in the kinds of themes that come through, the joy, the movement, the body in a dancing way, and this kind of excitement. And maybe it's my eye, but there's perhaps aggression influence in there as well. I think it's really important having this as a starting point for a couple of reasons, because he plays such a big part in the designers that come afterwards with influencing and establishing textiles as a profession in Melbourne in the 1930s. But he also has this kind of interesting technical legacy where he doesn't quite nail dyes. You know, like they're really beautiful, but they're not really that colour fast. So he sets up a number of things for designers that come after him, like Frances Burke. Frances Burke comes in really in the early 1930s, 33. She enrolls in RMIT, then Melbourne Technical College. Burke is studying screen printing, lino printing at the time. Michael O'Connell is working there at that time as well. We don't really know if he taught her or not, but we know that there is an influence that happens, because not only has he set up the profession, he's also really elevated this demand across Melbourne for very high quality textiles, that Irish linen, heavyweight, beautiful, for hand printed original designs, so not mass runs, it's very much still craft at that point, but it's elevated. And for things that are going to be seen as art, it's textiles as art, it's seen as something that's very beautiful. So 1937, O'Connell goes see ya and heads back to the UK, leaves quite a large hole in the local market for this new sector that he's opened up, and Frances Burke goes, here's my opening, I'm gonna get in there. So Burke starts to set up her own business, and she goes into business with a fellow student from MTC that she studied with, Maurice Holloway. And they decide that their first step is going to be dealing with the issue of colour-fast dyes for printing. So they actually end up doing a commission, and they also don't quite nail it the first time. They have quite a few technical issues with the first run, and they end up consulting with a range of different people about the kinds of recipes that they can use to get light-fast and water-fast dyes that would be really suitable for homewares, things that need to be laundered, that are going to be exposed to UV light for long periods of time. And we have these really beautiful examples like Gordon Shelby's notebook over here, which I'm just in love with, because all the images of it make it look enormous, but it's just this little tiny thing that you know he was carrying around with him, scrolling all of these notes in over time. So they developed these dyes after getting advice from people like Gordon about colour fastness and about the kinds of chemistry that they need for textiles and for making sure that those inks will hold. And they end up developing the most incredible palette of dyes at the same time as really streamlining their process for printing. They're still working with lino block at that point. While we're on dye recipes, I also just want to draw your attention over here. So this is from the Eclate collection, and this is just so beautiful and enticing, seeing the samples of the different fibres over here that have all been hand dyed, and they've got the recipes written on them, and it's really beautiful to see those different processes. You know, we've got art journals that people use, recipe journals, but it's quite distinctive when we have a look at the studio-based approach through to the manufacturing approach for batch testing later in history. So it's kind of nice to see that linear progression of process over time as the manufacturing industry develops in Melbourne as well. So we've got dye developing. We've got this beautiful palette of colours that start to emerge. And Karen and I were talking before about this distinctive palette that starts to develop in Burke's work. What I love about the palette is that she starts to come up with these really poetic names for them as well. So it's not just that they have all of these tests, it's that they have a whole range of I think they're beautiful, but we've got things like waxflower, banksia, saltbush, gum, like you can picture the colours, right? Blobs, sorry, that's gum blobs. I think that's a little bit different to gum. The gum blobs, you can imagine that sappy red kind of thing that comes out of an iron bark. We've got centre red, rock red ochre, kootabunja, and yarra green. And we've just had the yarra green lifted up, and it is that kind of muddy browny green. So we have this really beautiful palette that starts to come out. And there are other names that come in here. We've got things like spring green. So it's not entirely connected with a sense of Australian place. There's still the kind of broader European Western influences that are coming in. But we really do see an effort to connect the colour and the practice to place. And Burke makes a number of comments about how there's no better way to celebrate the country than through colour, which is really beautiful. So around the 1940s, so just before the 40s, Burke moves away from lino print. She's moving out from that handcraft practice, and she starts to move into screen printing with the business. So they start to go into silk screen printing, and we've got a really good example of that in this curtain here, which we think might have been a display curtain.
Yeah, the size of it makes me think that it's a display. We thought possibly it'd be part of cafe curtains on the end of windows. We think it's either one of those two, but yeah, I think it's possibly was a display in the shop as an example of how it might look.
Yeah, so it's just a baby, but to give you a bit of context, I want you to think about the windows behind you. These are big windows, and they cover a lot of the building, yeah? The reason that Burke starts to move into silkscreen is because she wants to be able to do prints with bigger yardage for big scale kinds of pieces. And it's at that time that she starts to establish a new firm. It's called Frances Burke Fabrics, and she starts to make a name for herself in architectural circles. So she gets all of these commissions for curtains by architects. So there's this remarkable dynamic that starts to occur where Textiles is moving away from the artwork. It is an artwork, but it's moving away from the artwork, and it's starting to move into domestic interiors and large-scale architectural interiors. So she gets these commissions from Robin Boyd and from Roy Grounds and Frederick Stern, amongst others. They're big commissions. They're very well known across many fields of design. They're getting a lot of publicity. And I love this quote. I have to read it to you in full. So Harriet Edquist, a historian, describes this, and I quote, "They closed over the architect's large expanses of glazed wall, cut out the exterior view." I just love that. Like, nah, we're not looking outside out of these huge windows, and created an entirely different experience of space, one which was internalised and framed by colour, pattern and texture. I mean, talk about the dominance of the textiles coming through in that space. So I just want you to picture these windows behind you. We have this incredible light and sense of space when we look at the design archive in relationship with the design hub out here, this architectural edifice. I want you to just picture all of the windows around us covered in this print, and just to think about how different our spatial experience would be right now, because that's really the kind of thing that Frances Burke is starting to move towards, really finding a place for textiles in this architectural frame. So there are some interesting things that happen at this point in history. It is wartime. We've started to move into the Second World War, and there are a significant number of things that start to happen that impact the way that designers are working. So she has been working with linen, but it's not Irish linen. She's been working with Indian linen because wartime has impacted supply lines internationally. What that means is that fabric and dye supplies from Ireland, from Egypt, that's, we've got the linen and the cotton, Japan, all of those shipping lanes have been closed. The Indian Ocean is one of the few that's still open for the import of textiles. So she's sourcing this very high quality textile, but it's opening up a different kind of market and a different type of international relationship for trade through textiles in relationship to Melbourne at the time too. So 1950s, we're coming toward the end of it, post-war. Post-war, Burke starts to realise that Melbourne's having a hard time. Australia's having a hard time. It's very difficult to get certain materials, including fabrics, textiles. It's very, very hard also with the economic conditions to get these big commissions. And it's very hard because international trade is starting to increase. There's a lot more demand for imported goods that starts to come through. And I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. So we're going to move through to Bee Taplin now. So this is a range of Bee Taplin's work, and we can say that with Bee, her path was definitely paved by what we see with the designers before her, particularly with Frances Burke, not just as a designer working in textiles, but also as an entrepreneur. And this is like strong women establishing a Melbourne textiles industry. So Taplin is navigating the post-war time and all of those issues that have been encountered by Frances Burke, but she's much earlier in her career. And she's like, I got this. I'm going to work across 2 disciplines, and I'm going to set up 2 separate businesses, and they're going to work together. So she sets up Faulkner Fabrics, which sells furnishing fabrics for curtains and upholstery. And she also sets up Bee Taplin Interiors. And that is her interior decoration practice. And it's really aimed at anticipating Australian style trends. And you might go, how's she doing that? Like, where's WGSN? That wasn't happening at that time. But there's some really interesting things that we do see come through. So I've got this article that I'm going to pass around from Women's Weekly, this one. So she starts to see these emerging trends, and I'll also get someone to hold up this folder because there's this really interesting about page, like handwritten on the typewriter, that's about Faulkner Fabrics, and she sets it up, and it's got some very interesting information in there. She basically notes that emerging trends in Australian interior design and architecture at that time are being inspired by changes overseas. A lot of designers across different fields, architecture, interior, and textiles, are being trained internationally and then bringing back European and American trends. In particular, and she notes in this, and I'm just going to read it out because nobody can read this tiny writing. She says, there's a growing demand for interesting textures and plain colours in fabrics with a pattern tie-up. And the increased use of glass walls, that mid-century modern, and landscape windows is creating demand for these curtains as well because, hey, it's Australia, it's getting really hot, and you need some protection from the light. And there's also changing ideas about domestic spaces and privacy and individual family modules as well. So she is starting to look at trend setting and marketing across these 2 businesses, and she uses a whole range of quite interesting approaches to do this. And it's incredible innovation and entrepreneurship that she shows. So she's set on being a style leader. She wants to generate interest around textiles and around it for interiors. And she's doing it across both businesses concurrently. I want you to keep that in mind. So the first thing that she does is she goes, I'm not just going to create my own designs like O'Connell and Burke have done. I'm going to align myself with the hottest artists of the day. So she goes out and she finds a whole range of artists. She finds them in exhibitions, through friends, through her networking. She seeks them out because of international interest. They include people like Barry Kay, who was becoming quite well known as a painter at that time, and later went on to be an incredible internationally renowned ballet costume and set designer, and then like 20 years later to be this incredible photographer that became known for his socio-anthropological studies on men with HIV. So like really remarkable people that form a part of the fabric of Australia in the international design field and art field. So that's her first approach. She's like, artist alignment, I'm on it. The next thing is that she starts to connect herself with high society. So she goes off and, that's the article I've shared around there, And in that article there, it's actually an article about Harold Holt's house. And they're like, hey, this interior design is very hot right now. What are they doing? It's the Japanese wallpapers that are being imported. She's found an opening in the market to import these things. Post-war, there's quite a high demand, and the shipping lanes are opening back up again. She's the first Australian importer, so she's captured the market. And interestingly, during that time, Burke is very annoyed because Burke is saying that there's all of these printed Japanese textiles making their way into the market, and she reflects later, when fabrics from all over the world came flooding in, they dropped Australian stuff like a hot brick. So she's doing well with the retail market, but what is it doing for Australian design identity at the time? Unsure. The next thing that she does with innovation is that she starts to design complementary screen-printed fabrics that are inspired by the wallpapers that she's importing. So you can see where this is going. She's like, I've cornered the market. Now I'm going to start creating things that complement that for this full look like we've got with Harold Holt's house at the time. And then the next thing that she does is through Faulkner Fabrics, she starts to develop curtain and furnishing textiles that she's matched with contemporary paint colour charts from Taubman's. So this is like pre-colour of the year, but she's doing it. She's got a colour match. So we do have some of those swatches from the textiles that are part of the collection here. We haven't pulled them out today, but it's quite interesting to think about that level of textile and interior decoration and also design working concurrently together across those businesses. It's really quite revolutionary at that point. What I think is really nice to reflect on at this stage is that Taplin's experience as a painter, because she's an artistic painter as well, is really feeding into her design practice across interior and across textile design. She's really thinking about how to identify opportunities across the fields, and it allows her to start to produce these innovative designs that address the technical challenges of colour matching. And as like a complete nerd, I have to say colour matching is incredibly different when you work with different mediums. Working with a paint, the way that it reflects light and refracts light, the way it has interplay with the colour fields around it, is very different to how textiles behave. So for her to be able to identify ways to match that is not just simply a case of going, this paint looks about right with this. It's another chemical and technical challenge that calls upon incredible expertise across those fields. So I think that's really important to call out from a design perspective, just how remarkable that is at the time. Okay, so we'll do a bit of a survey across the other things here. So we've covered a bit of lino printing, a bit of screen printing, talked a little bit about innovation, and we do have other examples of printing that are across some of the other collection selections here. So we have some from Ailsa Graham Art Fabrics. Yeah, these two. This is great. So we can see that yardage, and I think what's beautiful about this example is it shows us the use of the different layers of screens for the different colourways. We don't really have that in these two examples. We've got different backing colour choices, but this is really looking at how designs are being labelled. For people who are learning textiles, it's good to have these examples to physically show what's happening there. And we also have this interesting thing that's starting to happen with the commercial production of screen printing, where we've got sort of souvenir pieces that are being created for mass production. So we start to see this industrialisation, not just for design and interiors and architecture, but also for the people. You know, we've got our Olympic souvenir that's happening over here. We've got also, I think, if we shift right up this end, we've got some other interesting examples of screen printing here. So we've got a Rae Ganim one, again with multiple screens, but really dynamic, more contemporary feeling prints and motifs here. And we've got these pieces from Linda Jackson, and this is really lovely, and it might be hard to be down the end to have a look, but have a peek later, where she has a really exploratory approach to working with printing. So these are screen printed, but they're not printed with multiple screens like we see with this or with a set design. She's picking up through foraging all of these different eucalypt leaves, and she's either using them as a resist and using the screen print over the top, or she's printing with them and then screen printing over the top. So it's a really beautiful way of thinking how contemporary designers and showing how contemporary designers are still using these very simple techniques, but in new and exciting ways over time, and bringing their own flavour to it. So Prestige Fabrics and Gerard Herbst. Okay, so Gerard Herbst, I think this is a really interesting point to bring up when we're talking about print and how archives can show us that kind of progression of textiles and technology over time. Herbst is basically given free rein when he joins Prestige. He's doing a couple of things. He's come in and he's got training as an art director. He originally works in marketing. He's really switched on when he's thinking about what can I do to reinvigorate this company and where can I find a place for it in the field that we're in. So he's out there marketing it in quite interesting ways: photography, music, dance. He got 3 documentaries made about the company. It's quite interesting and quite contemporary when we think about ways that fashion and textiles are presented. But he also starts to introduce these links to what becomes digital textiles. So what we actually see here is a shift from this style of printing to printing with digital, well, it's with photographs really. So it's still screen printing, but you can use the image from the photograph or from a drawing and then transfer it. So in these images, you can see these great superposed models showing off some of the phototext effects where we've got them printed with photos of people's faces. And then we also have, as part of this archive, some of the screens or the things that were applied to screens that showed the drawings that were being used. So I don't think we've got one with one of the photos, but you can get a sense of it. But these are great because you can see that kind of movement from one technology, the hand-drawn, through to it being used much the way that we do screen printing now with UV light as a resist. It's not quite the same at that point, but it's really a very interesting link in the technology.
I think also, I'll just butt in and say, the choice of what they use to promote that by picking celebrities as their print, so it's Ava Gardner, etc. I've got all these scarves and dresses that you could wear your favourite movie star in a dress. I feel like that's almost irrelevant to current pop culture and people wanting to make clothes of stars that they love.
Completely. And it predates pop art. It predates Andy Warhol. So it's pretty exciting, really. So if we look at the kind of jump from that down to digital print, this is from Slorach and Thorn, so Bruce Slorach and Sara Thorn. And this is from Worldweave, one of their many, many labels. And this is probably the kind of print that we see most on the streets now, digital styles of printing, made with collage, made with a pastiche of different images and put together. So we can kind of see the jumps in technology when we look through that archive. So we've got a sense so far of the techniques. We've got a sense of exploration that's coming through. And I will just emphasise that with design exploration, we see a whole range of different things across the collection. So we've got some pieces from Hall Ludlow. This belt is a great example where the textile exploration is really through how sewing is happening, creating this linear, beautiful effect down the length of the belt and how it would really change an outfit. We've got these incredible pieces down here that you'll have to hold back from touching them, from Prue Acton. These are stunning, use of cording, use of lace, these beautiful embellishments, the touch of gold that comes through. It's traditional embroidery techniques, but they're updated and through the lens of a designer. And we have some of these pieces from Eclate. So I love the tufting because we're going through a tufting revival. But it's kind of nice to see that that's happening there. That's one that's been created on an industrial scale. You can see this great image that gives insight into that changing industry and working conditions as well with the women on the looms. But it's really quite exciting to see that coming through with the range of textiles in the collection. And we also have some of the photos from Glowweave that I alluded to before. I love the photos of the factory. I don't know if anyone's been to the Geelong War Museum recently, but you can see a lot of the machines in situ, and the scale of them is quite remarkable. So this is a state-of-the-art factory for the time. This is the peak of efficiency, and this really marks a shift in Australian textile manufacturing industry. We've gone professional a while back, But this is a shift to the efficient model of manufacturing, where they're not just designing the textiles, they're designing the systems for it to be produced and rolled out very quickly. So the whole factory is being designed as a floor plan, not only the manufacturing approach. I think what's really lovely about the Glowweave collection as well, you're gonna love these photos. The posing is really, I love it. So look at this cheerful group of people. So this is the peak of textile technology at the time, these kind of V-neck shirts, because they're using a whole range of inspiration, yeah. But they're using a whole range of new textile technologies with synthetics. So this pinstripe that they have through there, it's not necessarily woven in with the colour. They're doing dips where they're using a polyester and a nylon blend in some of the shirts. And the liquid polyester has all of these new properties that they've done research on. So there's odour resistance, there's pilling resistance. You're not going to have yellowing in the armpits in your Australian environment in your work shirt. And for some of these really fun ones, with the pinstripe, the mix of the nylon and the polyester creates a dye resistance. So you get this really incredible aesthetic that, it's very of a time to us now. But that's the beauty of the archive, right? You can really see this, and it looks like a shirt, but it does really tell us quite a lot about the technology that was at play in the textiles development. So we've got these beautiful pieces. We also have Robert Maltus down here, and these are beautiful, right? So we see this incredible approach with wool being woven, these beautiful uses of the lurex, so the kind of gold shine coming through, very contemporary for the time. Beautiful textures, and there's some really lovely hand finishing on the inside. So if you're nice, someone might open up and show you some of the detailing in there a little bit later. But it's really quite remarkable to see these pieces and the quality of the make, and that these were being produced at the scale that they were. So this was sort of après-ski. I don't know if that genre really exists in Australia now, but hey, we know it did at one point, right? So if we have a look kind of back down this end with Linda Jackson, while we're talking about kind of the value of archives with creative exploration and what they tell us about it, there are actually quite few examples of full garments in the archive holdings. And it's because the archives really focus on design process a lot of the time. So we understand about designing as a process, but for emerging designers coming into archives, it's actually incredibly valuable to be able to see how design thinking emerges through the doing. So having select pieces like this incredible piece from Linda Jackson, where she makes it in an intuitive way. It's the production of pieces, the applique of them on together, using the motifs of the plants from the area that she lives and that she observes. This is really important for young designers to see, that we work this way as well as this way and this way. So the breadth of this is, I think, profoundly important, particularly for fashion and textiles. What I want to talk about now is a little bit more up this end, and that's about the promotion of the fashion and textiles industry, but specifically about textiles. So before I alluded to how often textiles is overlooked when we look at fashion promotion and marketing, and that's partly why it's so exciting what was happening down with really with this whole section here, with the promotion of textiles through, teaming up with artists, through looking at how you can get it published about, and really trying to elevate the designer themselves and the producers. They're not really recognised. It's not quite as sexy as the fashion side, But what we start to see is a range of really interesting industry-led events that emerge. Some of them are led by manufacturers. So I think a contemporary example of this would be Woolmark today. Woolmark has an incredible program where they have awards, events, incredible campaigns that support emerging designers. They really invest in the wool industry from the farm right through to fashion and the textiles production. And they're really looking at the ethics of it, and they promote all of that. Back in the day, we have things that are happening a little bit differently. So we've got models like Diane Masters who start to get recruited to make textiles sexy. So Diane gets invited out, and she is a part of textile industry promotion events where models are invited to go to factories and to go into the industrial settings. There's the great photo of her holding the test tube. It's really trying to promote that technology that's behind the scenes. And it's stylised, sure, but it is making an attempt to do that, to show the innovation in the Australian industry. There's also these great trade events and these Gown of the Year events that start to happen. So what's really beautiful about some of the holdings that we have for Gown of the Year is that they name the textile designers and the manufacturers, and they often just don't get acknowledged. So we have this incredible moment that records the contributions of this sector of industry and celebrates that and has the awards around it. It's really great. And probably my favourite thing in this whole collection that we're looking at today is the rooster shirt dress. So I just love this on so many levels. So this is a promotional garment. And promotional garments were made by a number of companies. They're still made today. You know, some things are just made for the runway. But this is really a reaction to what's happening with a number of things. It's partly the post-war approach where textiles and industry are being promoted. There's limitations. So during the war years, Francis Burke, for example, was creating furnishing fabric, but there's not as much demand, and so how do you get people excited about it? If that's the only textiles you can access and it's the only thing that people are kind of buying, but they need clothes, you use the textiles for furnishing and you put it back into garments and you use those as promotional things. So I'm going to get too excited here, but this piece is beautiful. This piece is actually a Bee Taplin piece, and Simon's held up the photo of it being modelled in front of different backdrops so we can actually see it in the domestic setting where it was being used for interiors, for wallpapers, for prints, for curtains. But I want you to pay attention, just for a moment, to how beautifully made this piece is. It's a promotion garment. It doesn't have to be well made. It's made for photography. A lot of pieces that are made today for fashion photography are not well made. The seams are a mess. No one ever sees inside, so why do you invest the time in it? This is spectacular. It's silk-lined. It's got this beautiful shaped zip to make it sit in its skimmer style. And if you have a look at the placement, so this originally was just the silkscreen print, but they've embellished it all with raffia and beading. And they've made this special effort to do a dart that ends before the print starts on the side seam. Isn't it incredible? It's just the best way that they could think of to show that print without compromising it. It's really good design. Really good design. So I just love it. So they were worn at promotional events, and we still see these continue today. So things like the opening of your store. So Bee Taplin had models wear it when she opened her interior store, Colour Cottage on Toorak Road in South Yarra. And it was obviously photographed for quite a number of editorials and put out into press. So it's just a beauty. And it's like, look at the colour. It's just, love it. Okay, so we're in the final phase of our journey through what's on this table, and I'm actually very proud of myself. Haven't gone too off topic, which is good. So the final thing I really wanted to talk about was the kind of cultural influence that we can see through a selection from an archive like this. And this is where I want to come back to that point that I made right at the start of a past and multiple layers that we see across collections in different lenses and tiny apertures, refraction, the extended metaphor. We have a really interesting range of pieces here that give us insight into what was happening with trade over that pre-war, post-war, during World War II, and the kind of influences of those trade routes, like when I was talking to the choice of linen or the access or the making do, and how that has driven design innovation for textiles in Melbourne. We also have a bit of an insight into the kind of influences that designers were really drawn to at different points. And this is maybe delving a little into the territory of the past being a strange land, and that we can really view it quite differently when we see it through the eyes of today, through contemporary eyes. We don't have any particularly challenging examples in the collection, but there are some that are in the archive that we haven't pulled out. But what I think is really interesting is to pull out a couple of key examples. So, has anyone seen this kind of a design before? I'll give it a pass around because, again, it's like a tiny, tiny image from far away. This is a tapper bark cloth, and it's traditionally made by people across the South Pacific. So Pacific Islands, from Samoa, there's a number of different cultures that will work with this technique. Some of that cross-hatching that you might see in it looks a little bit like the Australian Indigenous designs that you see coming out of Arnhem Land. It's because there was a cultural exchange happening between the Pacific Islands and with Northern Australia. And when we have settler colonialists coming in, there's also a cultural exchange that starts to take place, potentially an appropriation when we look at it today. But there's certainly an appreciation that's happening at the same time. So what we're starting to see when we look across this collection is influences coming across from the different designers. So we've got O'Connell, influenced by the South Pacific. We've got Burke, influenced by tapper bark cloth, and in fact even making pieces that are inspired by it. So here's my second image for you to pass around, and I think you'll see some of the relationships here with this particular piece. We didn't pull it out today because it's a bit chunky. We needed a little bit of space on the table for other things. So this is her tapper cloth design. And with this design of Burke's, what I want you to notice is it's not necessarily the colour. It's more about the composition, the use of the different sectors, the repeat and the reconfiguration of different elements. The motifs that she uses are not necessarily from the South Pacific. They're chosen from her repertoire, so things like the seahorse that comes through. But it's certainly got the influence there that you can see in the design. She's also influenced in the 1940s and 50s by Aboriginal themes through some of her designs. And I was very excited before while I was just foraging up on the table to find the postcard series. This is a great one. So we've got things like the design with shields at the top. I think that one was part of the Latrobe Library curtains, more curtains. But we have some that are a little bit more subtle as well. So this design, shields, it's quite abstract. Totem. That one, shields. So totem's a lot more abstract. It's quite a beautiful, minimal design. It's got these lovely wavy lines, but the name gives us some clues, and it's definitely inspired by the kinds of things that she's seeing through what's around her. So, you know, when we think about industry at the time, who was buying these, where were they going? Some of these designs were acquired by US servicemen. They became quite popular post-war. Some of them were being used for displays in Maya windows. Some were being commissioned by large institutions like the State Library. And she also, I suppose it's interesting to kind of throw out there, is doing research by going into the State Library and really going into the Melbourne Museum. Yeah, Melbourne Museum, and having a look through the ethnographic collections there. She really wants to see those original bark paintings in person and really have a response to them. Maybe for a bit of context, at the time it was like the era of the P&O cruise, you know, when we start to post-World War II. There was a real love of the South Pacific and a real romanticising of it. So, you know, Bee Taplin is picking up on these things as well and is really excited by them. And she's like, yes, I've read South Pacific, the novel. It's very good. I'm going to do some designs based on that. And she goes on a cruise around New Caledonia and French Polynesia in the 1950s. And she sits on the deck, and again, great article here. This one's too tiny, but it's called Talk About. It's like the gossip column of the day. This is from the Adelaide News Gazette. And the Adelaide News is like, did you know Bee Taplin, she's been on this cruise and she has painted 60 paintings from the deck of the islands that she's been observing. So she just loves it. She's just out there and she's just filled with this joy and this passion and this excitement about South Pacific culture. And so she goes out and she makes all of these different silk screens and also imports a lot of goods and brings them back to Australia. So it's quite interesting seeing that sort of embracing at the time and that excitement and appreciation at the time. So we see these things coming through, but then if we roll back up to Linda Jackson, just to contextualise this, and I'll grab an image as well. Taplin starts importing some of her designs to the US, and it's actually something that we see in later parts of the collection as well. So when Slorach and Thorn and others start to think about importing their goods overseas as well, they realise there's a cultural cringe. They realise suddenly that these motifs that are being strongly associated with Australia, and it is Australiana through our eyes today, you know, the koalas, the kangaroos, the wattle, it's just not seen with the same kind of appreciation and nostalgia or love or whatever else underpins these things that make us embrace very obvious symbols. It's just not seen that way overseas. There's still this sense of Eurocentrism's better. Europe is better, the US is better, the imported goods from Japan are better. The cultural cringe kind of goes both ways, with Australia cringing at itself. And it is a kind of point of reckoning in a way. So Taplin decides that actually maybe some of these more overt designs in her oeuvre are a little bit twee and pulls back on them, and instead starts to look towards making more print designs that shift towards those international trends, and again bringing them to Australian shores, being informed through the eyes of another and bringing it back in. But what I think is really lovely is that when we look at the archive over an extended period, we can see these things come around again. So we have these moments where it's Eurocentric, it becomes very focused back on Australian colour, Australian naming, place connected to the designs that people are producing and appreciation of interconnected cultural exchange on these lands. A little bit of embarrassment comes in. But then we end up in a place where some designers start to embrace that again. So designers like Romance was born, like Linda Jackson and Jenny Key, continuing strong on that path. We really start to see more of that. So even Slorach and Thorn, this being one of their pieces, and it's maybe not representative as much of their lens on Australian culture, although it does give you some clues about how Australian culture and its relationship with fashion and textiles has changed. This is more of a streetwear sort of archetype, the t-shirt. So with them, they went on to work with what become quintessentially Australian brands. Stussy Sister, that was doing surfwear and streetwear, and Mumbo, which is quite interesting when you start to think of that coming around again. So we start to see this kind of return and this different kind of lens that comes out in this archive and the value of that too. So I think I've made through most of the points that I wanted to cover, and I do thank you for your attention during that, particularly when I got a bit excited and off track. But I think just as a wrap up, there is so much depth in the collection that the RDA holds. It's actually impossible to get through it all, because every piece you can pull out a story. You get stuck in Trove looking at the Women's Weekly articles from 1952, or you go deep into the influence of a particular artist's style, or you get very excited about industry and manufacture, or the textile technology, or marketing and fashion presentation events. There's just so much here that has value. And I think when we're really looking at how archives can offer us different insights and really have value for emerging designers today, that's really what it comes down to. It really comes down to not pulling out the one piece, but pulling out the spread to get a feel for those interconnected stories, and how the technology, how the techniques, how the exploration, how the grappling with national identity and cultural exchange, and sometimes the discomfort around that over time and how it shifts as well. Those conversations are really important to have happening in education spaces. So I hope you see that too, and I hope that when you walk around the table and gently resist touching the textiles, that you start to see the joy that really comes through with having the physical items there as well. So, yeah, thank you, everyone.